What's up, people of the world? Welcome. We are going to be talking about Ascension number 7, the latest and greatest tournament for Cosmonarchy Brood War, the latest and greatest large-scale conversion for StarCraft 1. I actually don't know if it's the latest large-scale conversion, but that's because I don't actually do anything other than work on this game, play this game, and smash. So let's talk about how things have gone lately, ladies and gentlemen. This episode of Prototype contains a screenshot of the second round, or I guess the second upper semifinal, but it's from Playoffs Round 2, which we will be recapping. I wonder if you can guess how this particular match went. However, we do have some developments in the bracket. I'm very pleased to see that we have had some of the stronger players making their appearance, making themselves known. The first order of business here is to cover the second quarterfinal match, actually, between Vik and iSarcasm, where Vik 3-0'd the man, formerly known as Igor. And holy shit, dude. That was crazy. That was a surprise. I was expecting it to be a 4-game set, at least. And I was expecting it to be in favor of iSarcasm, but it was not in favor of iSarcasm. In fact, Vik bopped him. Then he took the first game against Nablime, so he technically won 4 games in a row. But then Nablime was able to close it out afterwards with some pretty drop-heavy moves, and I liked that. I thought that was pretty epic. But we got to see some really nice macro games out of Vik, and we also got to see him tested and caught unawares, off guard, by a very interesting strategy with regards to the Huracan drops and the sort of heavy committal into Tier 1 military before the Tier 2 came late. It came later than he might have expected, but it did indeed show up, and then that was essentially what allowed Nablime to finish those games. So Nablime makes it to the upper final. And on the other side of the bracket, we did indeed have upper semifinal number 2 eventually played. It was played later than we thought, and so we casted it later than the other games. And so Mesk and I bore witness to a 5-game set between the Shambler and Hupseya, the latter of which, Hupseya himself, managing to start a reverse sweep comeback after being down 0-2, thanks to his gateway-focused openers that, as of right now, do not seem to do very well versus Zerg. I think that's fair to say. And the Shambler ends the whole set after some grueling macro games where Sky Toss reigns supreme, and then he 6-pools him on Otherworld. Actually, it might have been a 7-pool. I would have to go back and check to make sure, because I was too busy thinking, oh my god, we're going to Game 5, and it's on a map I made, and surely this will be epic. And instead it was that. Well, nonetheless, Hupseya will have chance to, once again, smash Hamster, and if he does that, if he manages to make it past yet another Zerg player, he will make it to face off against the winner of Vik versus iSarcasm. So we essentially have a rematch from the qualifiers, or from the quarterfinals, rather. So if Vik defeats iSarcasm, then it will be Hupseya versus Vik, mirror matchup no matter what, because if iSarcasm defeats Vik and gets revenge, he then has to repeat what he did in the Gauntlet qualifier against Hupseya and defeat him there in a mirror matchup. But whoever wins there will make it to the losers finals, where they will face off against the loser of Nablime and the Shambler. And whoever wins the losers finals will face off against the winner of Nablime and the Shambler in the grand finals. So there is still a path for all of the players that remain. We currently have the sort of top 6 finished and sort of understand who's going to be top 6, as we did, of course, say goodbye to Biddy, where iSarcasm defeated him 3-0, and then Hamster defeated 3-Crow 3-0, and that means that those 2 cheesy gentlemen are going to be cast down into the Gauntlet for the next tournament. And I've spoken before about how, it's no shade to those players, but they were kind of the last vestiges, the old dogs, so to speak, and they did not learn the new tricks fast enough to keep up with these whippersnappers. And I guess this more so applies to Biddy, as he's a bit on the older side compared to 3-Crow, but the 88 is from his birth year, I'll say that much. Actually, we've been omitting the 88 lately, and he said that it was always going to be just Biddy for these matches, for the tournament matches, and he would only use 88 when he was not competing, which I thought was interesting. I have to ask him about why he thinks that's why that's his main method. Of course, it's not really. I don't think it's supposed to be Biddy to begin with, right? It was just B-Tib or something, probably, if I had to guess. But No, Biddy B. Yeah, that's it. I can't remember if it was myself, Mesk, or Luciferius who first said that. I don't think it was me, so I'll just pretend that it was one of those two, even though I don't know who it was. But yeah, Biddy B is indeed the man. And you know what? If we decide the grand finals on Derelict the same way that we did in the last tournament, where it was a 4-0 for Mystery Meat, man, that could be pretty cool. And I think that's pretty much all you need to know is if it is indeed going to be Derelict, then Biddy B will live on in our hearts and minds. He'll have representation in the grand finals as a mapper. And the mappers always win, dude. Keep that in mind. So, Nablime versus the Shambler is one of the matches that we can preview at some point. But I want to linger a little bit more on the way that this is setting up, because we also have a couple of occasional newcomers who stream on through and check things out. We've got obviously the AI tournament that Pr0totype's been putting together as well. So there's a couple of other things bubbling beneath the surface. And now that Pr0totype is no longer in the Ascension number 7 tournament, he can maybe focus a bit more attention on that. Doesn't have to get sidetracked by the pesky competition and can focus on his own that he's building up, which is kind of cool. And I've also been thinking a little bit about like, okay, well, we have all these class 2 players. Surely we should probably do like a group stage or something just with those guys, because then it might be a little bit more even keeled. And even though it's like like BSL, which is like the bombastic Star League. I guess they've been embroiled in some drama lately, but the reason I bring them up is not to remark on that, but instead to talk a little bit about how they have like Hasu League, and they have Chobo League, I think, and they have like all of these like sort of lower tier leagues that feed into the actual Star League, which is kind of interesting to think about it. It's like, all right, well, if you've got lower tiers or whatever, then yeah, why not have such tournaments? And maybe like if people win these tournaments, these group stages, I guess, frequently enough, then maybe they could have like an actual set to face off against somebody who doesn't have a great record, who's like on the lower end of the winners set or like the upper set. Like I could imagine a world where you actually have like push and pull, where you have like instead of it being like all tournaments in the same way that we have group stage into playoffs, well, now we have gauntlet into group stage into playoffs. Instead of it being like that, you could theoretically have a world where you play like this bracket, maybe double elimination bracket, at each tier. So you get the class 2s and then the class 1s. And then it's like, all right, whoever was not able to win very many games, or whoever went winless in the class 1 bracket, has to face off against like the winners of the class 2 bracket. And if the class 2 guys win, then it's like, oh shit, then they take their spot in the class 1 bracket. And then, we start it off again like in the next month or whatever. Like that could be kind of neat to think about stuff like that, right? As a general format discussion. But I've definitely been thinking about how we might find a home for the homies that just keep getting gentrified out of their neighborhood, as Ben obviously has put it in the past. Because now we just have so many good players. Well, I say so many, but we have a top 6 that looks pretty good. We had, obviously Mystery Meat wasn't a part of this. So Mystery Meat is also, like, you could say we have a top 7 that looks pretty solid. And then one of Hapsea's friends, Anansi, from New Zealand, I believe. So Nablime has somebody to practice with. He is masters in StarCraft 2, and he seems to be spanking ass in these casual games that he's just like looking for people to play against, and he finds people and they play against him, and then they're like, oh shit, you're actually good, and then they die. I don't know all the details. I haven't seen any of his games yet. I should probably grace him with a cast over or something. But yeah, it's cool to see, definitely. And I think, honestly, Nablime might poke him and be like, hey bro, I got to practice to fight against the Shambler. He's a Zerg player. Let me get some practice games. But like he would probably fill out our top 8 in the average tournament if I had to guess. And so like you'll filter that in. You think about the other people like, Newt or Sipiak, who clearly showed some promise. Even Keen obviously has shown promise in the past as well. And it's cool to see the players, we're starting to see the differences between the levels of play, and we're starting to see more people gravitate towards the top as well. So you get people like, this new guy in Ansia. You get people, obviously, like Hapsea himself. If they end up sticking with the project, if they're interested in continuing to compete, It would be really cool, really awesome, really great to see them in action. And continuing to have their presence in these tournaments would be really cool for sure. And, you know, it's only bound to get more competitive from here. Like, I don't want to make any promises because I don't think this will happen anytime soon. But I'll just say that in some future point, it would not surprise me if the Shambler and the Blime, and maybe even, dare I say, Mystery Meat, end up being cast out in the same way that we just saw, like, Biddy B and 3Crow cast out. And once those names are in the qualifier, like, whoa, bro. What's happened here? You know what I mean? Like, there's some absolute killers that could be in the next qualifier. Assuming Anansi wants to play in these tournaments, he could end up being in the next qualifier too, right? And so it's swiftly becoming more and more of an exclusive club. If you want to be in the hype video, if you want to have these fancy show intros that we sometimes have the background music playing during interviews because XD. Spoiler alert, I definitely need to get into the Stream Deck usage since I have one. I just don't like using it. It's too small. It's for manlets or something. But I should just mount it somewhere and be able to use it because clearly I'm going to need to, as the production scales in complexity, I need to find some way to cut back on that complexity. You know, there's I think 2 points where I had my mic unmuted during the break screen, and you know, it's not like we hot mic'd or anything. It's not like I said anything bad. It was more distracting than anything. Like I crushed a can or something, and so if somebody was just like wanting to listen to the pleasant music Inoslix has been making, which apparently he'll have an update for me soon with the Zerg stuff, which is very exciting. He you know, that if somebody's just trying to listen to that, what the fuck? What is this can being crushed in my ear? Is this a throwback to the Mixer days where we're crushing Metathrom's brain? Well, not quite, because I just didn't mute. And so, like, obviously, if I just hit a button on the Stream Deck and it mutes both audio sources that I need and transitions me into that waiting screen, then we're good. That's all I need to do. And then I can do the same thing where I hit the button to the right of it or whatever, and it does the inverse of that, where it turns back on those sources of audio and transitions into the other set, right? So that would make the most sense, but unfortunately, I did not hook that up for this tournament, so that'll just be some goofy leftover. And so anyway, I do think we're definitely going to be having a good time, a fun time, looking at the rest of these matches, and we might as well preview the second, now that we're done recapping the second round, we might as well preview the third round of playoffs, which is again the upper final, the Blime versus the Shambler, Terran versus Zerg. Elimination 2A, which is Veek7 versus iSarcasm, that is Protoss versus Protoss, and Elimination 2B, which is Hapsea versus Hamster, Protoss versus Zerg. And the winner of the elimination matches will face off against one another. So if it's, you know, again, Veek repeating his path against iSarcasm and Hapsea repeating his path against Hamster, the two of them will face off against each other for the decider in a Protoss versus Protoss matchup. That will determine who meets the loser of Nablime versus the Shambler. So I guess I can start there in the upper final. I think Nablime has the advantage here, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure if it's anything due to the in-game stuff. Like, I think generally his personality, his playstyle is definitely suited to games that the Shambler is kind of not suited towards. Like, he likes his tier 2 timing attack, but he likes to make that happen 12, 15 minutes into the game. Nablime is totally fine going for a 30, 40-minute game. He specifically tried to do that to tire Veek out. And it seemed to have worked, because even though Veek won the game, he wasn't able to pick up a win in the rest of the set. I think it was like a combination of how long that game went and how exciting it was, how exhaustive it was. You combine that with the fact that the rest of the strategies that Nablime threw it down were unorthodox and something that Veek had maybe never seen. Now, Shambler should be a little bit more familiar with the strategies, but I think the playstyle mismatch here, the styles make fights argument, comes into play. I think Nablime will be able to take this series. The other thing is that apparently some weird, I don't know what the details are, or if it was like a short-lived thing or a long-lived thing, but during the Shambler versus Hapsea on Sideshow, that upper semifinal number 2 match, so I think that would have been map 4, basically Shambler had some kind of interruption, had to pause for an extended amount of time. I don't know how long it was. It was probably like 5 minutes or something. And then when he came back, he was good to go. They unpaused. But then he said that, like, he would have had this match, but some shit happened, right? He did a little bit of typing, but it sounded morose typing. So I hope he's okay. I hope everything is all right. He definitely mentioned that he felt tilted and too tilted to play seriously, and that was after winning the set, right? Ultimately, the Shambler did win. And so when he said that he was too tilted to play seriously, I thought he'd lost. I thought like, oh shit, that must mean that Hapsaya completed the sweep, reverse swept him or like hit him back after losing the first game or something. I don't know. It was definitely strange that the Shambler had that happen to him. So it must have been something external, which is why I say I don't know if Nablime has he's got some advantages and some strengths that Shambler may also have weaknesses. In the same sort of like parity, like there's like, oh, the thing that Nablime is good at, Shambler is not necessarily as good at, that kind of thing. But I think that if Shambler continues to have this sort of external shit going on in his personal life, which has been happening for some time now, then it's kind of like, okay, well, he might just have this built-in disadvantage. So who knows what's really going to happen there? But I feel like Nablime, as far as I know, doesn't have the same level of personal stuff going on, or if he does, he's more guarded about it and doesn't mention it. And so maybe it doesn't affect him as much, or he's better at handling it or whatever. And so therefore, it seems like Nablime is in a pretty good spot there. It's a weird point to speculate on, obviously, because it's down to their personal lives. But it definitely feels like I have to call that in favor of Nablime just in terms of his stability that he projects out into the world and the fact that he likes those longer games. So if he can hold off the aggression, I think Shambler will take at least one map off in the set. This could be yet another 5-game set. But I do think that Nablime will make it to the grand final once again. This will have been the third grand final that he's ever been in, if he does make it there, because he made it in Ascension number 4 as Zerg and number 5 as Terran, where he actually defeated Mystery Meat in the upper final with a reverse sweep, and then said that he talked a big game about doing it again in the grand final of Ascension 5, but he just got 3-0'd instead. And then obviously he did not make it to the grand final of Ascension number 6 as Hamster made it there, defeating him. It was defeating Nablime. So it was Biddy B, Nablime, and then the Shambler. And then Mystery Meat showed up and just Giga chatted him out with 4 random rolls as Protoss in a row. We all remember that very fondly. But I do think that means that the Shambler will await the winner of the third elimination match, right? Elimination 3, which is ironically the 5th elimination match, but you know what I mean. Veek versus iSarcasm is a tough one to call because I think iSarcasm has been getting better PvP practice lately. But Veek has been playing against I think Anansi, definitely Hamster, definitely Shambler. So there's been practice with him in general. It might be not the same matchup, but he's sharpened himself in the sense that he's played a lot of matches recently as far as practice is concerned. And I also know that iSarcasm is a little bit under the weather lately, so there's some scheduling stuff that has been going down where they moved their match that was supposed to be played on Sunday. They moved it to Tuesday, which is actually when this video will be coming out, believe it or not. So by the time you're listening to this, the match has already been played, but we won't know the outcome of the match until Friday. And so I guess I'll also pull back the curtain a little bit and say that when the Shambler and Hapsaya had their match, after I knew it was done, because Shambler was like spectating games on a map that he's working on and I was playing versus It Depends, making some tism, the thing that I mentioned to the Shambler was basically like, don't respond to this with which one you're doing, but if you won, message Nablime to set up the time for your next match, and if you lost, then message Hamster, because that would be the opponents, right? And so I said the same thing to Hapsaya, like without spoiling the match outcome. If you won, message Nablime. If you lost, message Hamster. And so that's what essentially I am going to do, is I'm going to message Veek after his match and say, if you won, sit tight while I wait for knowledge that the other Elimination 2 game has completed. And if you did not win, thanks for playing in the tournament and GG's, and hope you're not too tilted. That's pretty much what I'm going to say to everybody. And say like, hope you enjoyed your time with the tournament. And then I'll say the same thing to iSarcasm is, if you won, then do XYZ thing. And if you lost, then okay. But, since we don't know who they're going to be facing, I basically will need to wait for the Elimination 2B match, which is Hapsaya versus Hamster. When I know that is being played, I will say, message Hapsaya and say, hey man, if you won that match, then good on you. If you can message both Veek and iSarcasm to ask them who won and see who to ascertain who you're fighting against, and then set up the time with the player you're actually fighting against. That would be awesome. And then, etc. If not, then that's fine. But ideally, what will happen is Elimination 3 will be played alongside the lower final and the grand final on Saturday. And so the reason why I want the players to communicate with each other is so that they can figure out what times on Saturday they are available. As long as they broadly know that they are available on Saturday, then that's acceptable. But the main thing is I need to know that everybody is, kosher in that respect for that day, because we will be casting the matches Friday, leading into the Saturday games, which are going to be the final games of the tournament. Or at least that's the current plan. If it has to happen that we cast like the grand finals live on like a random Monday or Tuesday or something, then, that's something that can be arranged. But I would prefer to get it all out in the spectacle of like, I definitely want to cast that match live. Like, I don't want to cast that from replays. I think it's better to interview people live and stuff. I was actually kind of hoping that like maybe Shambler and Hapsea would both be like available for interviews after their match. But certainly I would love to cast as many of these matches live. Now, in the case of Veek versus iSarcasm, I don't think they can do that on Friday. So, okay, one of our players will actually be eliminated without being able to be immediately reached for comment as far as the games. And that will suck. But it looks like maybe there's like a chance that, for example, Sublime versus the Shambler and Hapsea versus Hamster rematch can be done on Friday live. And that would be ideal. That would be optimal. And then we can do the rest of the matches, of course, Saturday live, as many as possible, if not all of them. And that is how we're going to be bringing you the action. But yeah, again, I think if you have to look at the matches, obviously the history favors Veek in the matchup against iSarcasm. Narrowly, the history favors Hapsea in the matchup against Hamster. But I'll say two things. One thing is Hamster obviously has the ability to look at what the Shambler did and look at what Hapsea did versus him, and say, like, versus Hamster, right, in that quarterfinal matchup, and say, okay, what can I learn from this? Because it was a 5-game set, and Hamster almost completed the reverse sweep. So it was definitely something where it could have gone either way. And, this is not to say that Hapsea can't do the same thing, but I do think that, if, say, Hamster has time to practice against people like Veek, people like iSarcasm, they might not be on the same level of Hapsea as Protoss. I'm not 100% sure yet, but it's definitely something where it seems pretty obvious to me that, like, Veek's got pretty good macro, and iSarcasm has pretty good macro, maybe a little bit less good than Veek, but he might have, like, better micro or unit control or whatever. It's hard to say. He definitely has his own set of strengths, though, and he has his own ideas of what's going to be good, and he brought the Gladiuses out, and they didn't work out too well, right? And that was in the second quarterfinal matchup. And so when I'm thinking about it in those terms, it's like, okay, there's these practice partners that Hamster might be able to secure some time with. He was just playing against Veek earlier today, as a matter of fact. And so I think Hamster will be practiced. Obviously, Hapsea has an Ansi now from his own neck of the woods to play some matches against and to practice up against. And so I think that's pretty good. But I'm not sure who to call this one for. Whereas, like, it seems like the other matchup, again, barring some reinvention from iSarcasm, it does feel like Veek will be able to win that series, even if it's closer because of the time that iSarcasm has had to think about and reflect on the mistakes that were made in that set. He might be able to take a map. He might even be able to take 2 maps. And obviously, iSarcasm can functionally win against Veek, but it's definitely something where I'm not 100% sure about, like, who's going to take that one. But I do have to call it in favor of Veek overall, because I've seen Veek really impress me with his macro skills. Now then, if we look at Hamster, or we look at, Hapsea, right, that matchup down there, Elimination 2B, it feels a little bit different. You know what I mean? It feels a little bit different. So I do think that one's too close to call for me. But whoever moves out after that series, I think might have the narrow favor over Veek. Although I will say, if it's a mirror matchup, it kind of changes it. Obviously, Veek will have more immediate practice against that. If Hamster emerges over Hapsea and Hapsea's run ends as 5th to 6th, tied with whoever loses versus, we're calling it in favor of Veek, but it could have been either one in Elimination 2A, then, that's an inglorious end for our Protoss Grandmaster. But it is something that we can maybe understand, maybe we can look at and say, like, oh, damn, good ups on Hamster. Maybe you would even say that's more evidence for the matchup being imbalanced because maybe Hapsea is supposed to be a much better player than Hamster. I actually don't know Hamster's StarCraft 2 rank or if he plays StarCraft 2. But, you know, there's room for him to... It also depends on how seriously he's taking it, right? It's like Hapsea is streaming StarCraft 2 and practicing that and trying to grind out like a bunch of ladder matches and stuff. So that's where his focus is at. Whereas Hamster... I mean, he played like 8 hours or more, maybe more than that, of CMBW just today, bro. Just today. So that's pretty nuts, right? So with all of that said, I do think that the next matches are going to be bangers. I think all of the games here could go 4 to 5 games. I think it would be really surprising if any of them were 3-0s. If I had to bet on a likelihood of one of them being a 3-0, honestly, I might do Nablime over Shambler, but I really don't think that's going to happen. It's like... maybe like a 15-20% chance that happens. And I'm sure Shambler, who does listen to these podcasts religiously, is going to say, what the fuck? But it's more like the stylistic plus the outside influence. And I hope it's not the case. Like, I hope all of these matches are very close and contested. And I hope that, we get some good matches. Even if it is a 3-0, I hope it's like a close 3-0 where it could have been either or, right? Like the Hamster 0-4 to Mystery Me in the best of 7 grand final of Ascension 6 is like, yeah, that was a clean sweep, but it didn't tell the whole story. Like, Hamster did some admirable improvements to his play each match. He got better and better at fighting Protoss each match. It just wasn't enough to get him over the hump. And that was a matchup he hadn't been tested in up until that point. And, every time you're thinking, well, surely he won't get Protoss again. And he did. And he fucking did. So what can you say about that? But hey, I'll put it to you this way. I think we are in for a treat, a spectacle for the final matches. I'm really looking forward to them. And I cannot wait to see them all in action. So there is that. Now, I will say that this tournament also exposed a flaw in the... Well, I don't even know how much of a flaw you can call it, but we'll say it's, for the sake of argument, we'll say it's a flaw. I think it's not spectacular, which is it exposed a match or a sort of circumstance, like a way that the format was working, where there is no bracket reset in between stages of the tournament. So, for example, we have 2 rematches from the quarterfinals in the elimination matches. And that is the maximum number of rematches possible, actually, in the context of a double elimination tournament, going from quarterfinals into the next rounds. And Sarcasm brought up that usually they do like a bracket swap. And I'm not sure if it's only in this instance or if it's always the way where it's like the loser of the, say the winner's semifinal, the upper semifinal 1 will go to the other side of the bracket, and the winner of the upper semifinal 2 will go, the loser of those matches will drop down to the lower bracket, but on the opposite side. So what I mean is, the first and second quarterfinals, that was Nablime and Veek winning those. And so Biddy B and Sarcasm fell to the same side of the bracket where they fought each other, right? And that made sense to me. It's like, okay, the loser of those matches is dropped down to face off against each other. And that is our elimination 1A game, right? So the A side of the bracket is the first 2 quarterfinals and the first semifinal. And then obviously the upper final is where they meet. Now, the B side of the bracket is the last 2 quarterfinals. That was Hamster Hapsea and 3 Crows Shambler versus, obviously the second semifinal as well. And then that should be where elimination 1B come from. And that's true for the quarterfinals, where the losers of quarterfinals 3 and 4 face off against each other. And that always made sense to me, because it's like we have 2 different sides of the bracket, 2 different halves of the bracket, essentially. So this is what we look at. But in this particular case, if we don't do a bracket swap at some point, what we are basically saying is, well, depending on the match outcomes, you basically have a rehash of the quarterfinals in the elimination, say 2A and 2B in this case. Now, technically in Ascension number 6, we actually saw this happen. It was Nablime against 3 Crow in the quarterfinals. I believe that would have been quarterfinal number 3 of that tournament. And then Nablime lost to Hamster, who beat Biddy B. And then 3 Crow and Biddy B fought each other, as you might expect. 3 Crow wins, and so 3 Crow moves on to face the loser of the Nablime versus Hamster game, which wound up being Nablime. And so then Nablime has to face off against 3 Crow again. Now, under the proposed change where we do the bracket swap, Nibelheim would have gone to the other side of the bracket, and even though he lost in upper semifinal 2, he would have been seeded into the lower bracket elimination 2A. So even though like upper semi 2 usually corresponds with the B side of the bracket, in this case we would swap that open. So I don't know how to feel about that from like, should we only do the swap between quarters and semis, or should we just always do the swap? Which would basically mean, like, for example, in this tournament where Hamster and Three Crow lost, instead of facing each other, they would face people from the quarterfinal 1 and 2 losers. So like maybe quarterfinal number 1 loser would face off against quarterfinal number 3 loser, and number 2 loser would face off against number 4 loser. I don't know if that makes as much sense. The other thing you could try to do instead is just use the seeding. So I seed these players 1 through 8 when they reach the playoffs. And so maybe it would always end up being that, like, you know, if you were, say, seed 7, like Three Crow was, and seed 8 like Biddyby was, then you would never be able to face off against each other. Instead, you would have... So in this case, iSarcasm was 4. So he's the higher seed. Actually, he's not the higher seed player, so I don't even know how that would work. Because in this case, I guess iSarcasm would face Three Crow and Hamster would face Biddyby. Because you'd always seed the highest seed against the lowest seed and the second highest seed against the second lowest seed. That's always how this kind of seeding works. And that's always to make it so that if you really are, like, you're always the underdog, and so it like kind of guarantees, or it's supposed to hedge bets towards the favorite players or the higher ranked players or higher seeded players. Those players are supposed to be the ones who face off and guarantee the most matches, so they go deeper into the tournament. And you start off by eliminating sort of like the lower ranked players such that you can face off against each other and have like the big heavy hitter matches, right? And so with that seeding correction, I guess you would still avoid this, right? Because then you would have put iSarcasm against Three Crow as elimination 1B and Hamster against Biddyby as elimination 1A. And then if Hamster wins, he moves on to elimination 2A, which is on the opposite side of the bracket of where he is, and he would face off against Veek, I guess, in this case. Or would he? Because we might still do the bracket swap or the seeding swap, so you might still be able to get like rematches is what I'm getting at. So it's a little convoluted if we make it always about the seeding, which is attractive to me on one hand. You could still get rematches. So is the idea that you want to avoid rematches, or is the idea that you want to maximize the like fairness or whatever of the seeding? Because if it's to avoid rematches, then you would just only do the bracket swap for the losers of the semifinals. The losers of the semifinals would go to opposite sides of the bracket, and then you would have no chance of having a rematch of quarters. And that would be fine for me. Like, I wouldn't hate that. But if that's the rule that we go with, then I don't know. I just want to make sure I have a reasoned argument for why I'm doing it and what the goal is, right? So, you know, it's always helpful to actually concretely understand the ramifications of a change that you're making. Just like with balancing, it's the same thing with tournament design. So yeah, I think for the next tournament, we might do that. I'm still playing around with the idea of like, do I want to change the format of playoffs in any meaningful sense? I go back to that conversation we had a couple prototypes ago, talking about how right now we have a pick ban, which is actually just banning, and then the lower seed or the player who loses the coin toss picks the starter. And then whoever loses each map obviously picks the next map. So what we could have instead, since we have best of 5s and best of 7s for the grand final, but best of 5s for everything else, is we could instead have that you ban a map each, you pick a map each, and then you ban a map again. And that would leave you with, I think that technically because we have 8 maps and not 7, that would still leave you with 2 maps. So I guess the higher seed would ban 1 extra map. Yeah, I don't know. That's still a little messy, right? But like something like that could be interesting if you're trying to specifically say, I want to pick this map. That would have allowed, say, for example, Biddyby to pick Sideshow in his set against Nibelheim when they did their match, their quarterfinal. I almost said rematch. I mean, technically it was a rematch at group stage. But yeah, beyond that, it was like, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. But I like the idea of trying to mess around with this sort of thing and come up with better ways, more novel ways, more interesting ways to have players flex. Like, if Nibelheim really doesn't want Sideshow, then he should ban it first. But if he wants to ban Highwater or whatever else instead, then he's got to, think about what he wants to ban. Now, obviously, if there's a complaint about like the map pool being too a non-standard or whatever, I can understand that. And we're going to be working on new maps over the break anyway, so I'm not really worried about that. But, you know, these are all considerations and questions that we think about. It's like, what kind of thing do we want out of this experience? What do we want as far as achievements are concerned for like goals or guidelines for what the maps are going to be like? That's something we can drill down a little bit deeper after the tournament. But just sort of thinking about that, right? Like formats are important to me. I want to make sure that the tournaments are fun and good and have fair play and all that, and are not just there for spectators, but also there for, you know, the players who are participating in them. Because, you know, odds are if you're only going to be gearing it towards the spectator experience, well, that's all well and good, but the players also need to feel like they're being respected and that it's a reasonable undertaking to play in these tournaments. If they think that the format is stupid, then they might just decide not to play, and then we don't have games. So you gotta make sure that the players are taken care of in that respect. And it's obviously never my intention to fly too close to the sun with my format ideas to the point where we're maximizing the viewer spectacle, but at the cost of the, say, integrity of the gameplay, integrity of the competition, and of course the I guess, satisfaction of the players. Like, obviously, some players will never feel like they were done right. Some players will always feel like XYZ thing is dumb or shouldn't be in there, or should be in there and is critically missing. But, like, within reason, I would like the players to feel like, okay, the tournament format itself is fair, and it's not, like, overly biased in one direction or whatever. Which is another reason why, when I did that bracket swap in the gauntlet to afford Veek a different opponent, I did feel like it actually created more problems than it solved, and, you know, in the future, especially when we're going to have more games, because I am leaning towards the gauntlet being triple a limb, although we might have other ideas later on. Like I did earlier today, I was thinking, what if we just had a bunch of group stages? But that has its own potential issues with qualification, and, you know, we'll have to see about that, basically. But I do think that there's room for improvements in the format, and I just want to make sure that the format is appropriate for all players, and I don't want to do stupid shit like bracket swaps and stuff. If you can't make your match, then you're just DQ'd at that point. And the only real trouble is, like, if you both have no availability overlap with each other, what's the deal? I mean, in this particular case, if we had that extra week that I was talking about, then that wouldn't have been a problem, right? But maybe it still would have if we needed to do another match after the fact with those players for whatever reason. Or like another match later on that maybe Veek wouldn't have been able to make it or whatever, or his opponent wouldn't have been able to, or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I mean, we'll just have to wait and see. But enough about Ascension tournaments, enough about tournaments in general. It's time to talk about progress, or as I like to sometimes call it, progress, because it's very pog that we're making a lot of progress on key tasks. Since the last prototype, we have cracked the code for the BattleNet server. I think the very next day, actually, I worked on that with Veek. We figured out why you can't host games and all this other stuff. We did also ascertain that the performance of the server is not... It's leaving some things to be desired. Even on extra high latency, there were a lot of like spikes and stuff. So figuring out what the bottleneck is definitely going to be high on our next list of priorities. But you can connect to the server, and you can play a game on there. However, you do need to forward your ports, and that is pretty annoying. So what we might end up doing is testing a sort of like Radmin alternative for the purpose of allowing you to just bridge the connection and not need to forward your ports. If that is indeed the case, where we test it and we see, oh shit, this actually does work. You actually don't have this problem where when you have this LAN sort of emulation alongside Radmin or whatever, or something like Radmin, but not Radmin, because Radmin has a built-in limit. If that's the case, then great. We're in for it. Like, we can figure out a way to do that. We can still use our... I guess we can still use our idea for that as like a alternative to forwarding your ports, which is pretty obnoxious to do. But when it comes to the BattleNet stuff, we mostly just need to figure out why it's lagging. I think that's a bigger problem because, you know, maybe we can get everybody to forward their ports. Maybe it's not that difficult. Maybe we can even automate it somehow, though I really highly doubt that. But the main thing is, if we can't figure out, even if we can figure out something for that, if at the end of the day you forward your ports and the performance is still terrible for the actual gameplay, then that's its own problem. So, yeah, that's unfortunate. Now, there are some UI improvements, or I guess just progress made as well. The cleanup of button sets CPP has begun. This is a file within our plugin that controls, as you might imagine, the button sets. A lot of the code in there was really quite terrible, or just like dysfunctional for whatever reason and very inconsistent. And in addition to that cleanup, we've also seen that Veek has started working on hitting the tab button to cycle through command cards. There's a lot of issues with that we are going to try to track down and fix. And of course, one of the other things that we have to do is like make it so that maybe when you hit Alt, well, not Alt tab, but Control tab or something like that, instead of just tab, we'll toggle the terrain. I wouldn't really care that much about if we just remove the keyboard shortcut and then you just click it if you need it or something, then maybe that's fine. I don't think anybody actually uses it. So yeah, who knows? But adding that feature is going to be experimental in some ways, but it will definitely teach us a little bit about whether or not it like makes the macro too easy or whatever. And critically, I think it'll unlock the usage of, more structures and such. I still think you'll want a control group for like air production structures and ground production structures separately. Obviously, you'll also want a control group for like production structures in one sector of the map versus production structures in another sector of the map. I already do that as Zerg anyway, so I can speak from experience saying that is a significant improvement. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what the ramifications will be as far as it pertains to like the skill level of the game or whatever, but I am excited to see it in action, and I definitely want to keep working on it and keep seeing progress made on it, because it's not actually me who's working on it. It is Veek, of course. So shout out to Veek7, who is absolutely cracked. I've also been making some progress on some recent bounties, and most of the work lately has been done on AI. I'm actually going to be working on AI a little bit later today as well. But another bounty that was made is, I guess this isn't really bounty related, but I did fix the networking of Faction Wars, so you can now play it on multiplayer. I did mention that, I think, in the last prototype, that it was a bit buggy right now. So that's fixed. And then on the bounty list was an implementation of a game mode that I dubbed Massacre. And Massacre is, you don't get to harvest Vespene, and you really don't get to do anything with gas, but every time you train a unit or kill a unit, you get 3 Vespene, because 3. And so far, it has led to some very silly matches. Veek said that DF said that the replays don't work, and that the break occurs when you first get your resources assigned to you. And I'm suspecting that I'm just doing it in a non-standard way that somehow isn't synced to the resource. I don't know why that would be the case, but I will investigate that separately as like similar to fixing the networking of the Faction Wars stuff, which does work in replays. I would love to fix the Massacre stuff so that we can have Massacre castovers, because that's just funny to me. But yeah, all these custom game modes are available, and we've already seen, Biddy B, DF, Shambler, and some other people play those non-standard game modes. And, some people are like I remember iSarcasm was like, I will play any normal game mode. And it's just funny. It's like, yeah, dude, exactly. You leave the custom game mode stuff for us goobers. You go play your regular CMBW. It's pretty funny. And then somebody else was like, dude, fastest map? And I was like, no. But I'm sure somebody else will make it. So yeah, some progress has been made on adding more stuff. Obviously, the AI has been significantly improved. We are continuing to make progress on that by improving their build orders on an individual basis and their general code in other bases. Like, the main thing that I'm looking at here is that, like, I have to improve their gas capping because it's kind of inconsistent right now. It's better, but it's inconsistent. I also definitely, absolutely need to wrangle... I guess just generally, I want to make it so that the request system is like a little bit better at not hitching on like one thing. There's some Terran build orders that request like like palladiums, like one too many scrapyards or one too many palladiums or one too many covenants or one too many vestries. And they don't have as many stockades or fulcrums as they need, and they will just never progress from that point because they're like, hey, I need this. But they're too dumb to realize that in order to make that, they would need to make another fulcrum or another stockade. I think it might be possible to like automatically increment the source structure request when it receives a request for an add-on. But in the interim, without that kind of code level feature being added, like, I think the main thing to think about is finding a way to figure out what build orders have that problem and figure out where the code is that is giving them the wrong quantity of requests and just adding an extra one, basically. So we'll see about that. That's absolutely something that I want to resolve. And there's a couple of other things like that where it's like, oh, they just get this request that like hangs them up. Even if it's not like a huge hang up like the Terran Atom one that is just permanent, by the way. At the very least, you know, we can smooth out other cases where it's like, oh, for like 30 seconds, they just stop spending any of their money because they're like waiting for enough minerals and they already have the gas, so they float a lot of gas or something like that, right? So we are going to be improving them further over time. This is going to lay the groundwork for Three Crows AI tournament, and it'll also lay the groundwork for some upcoming content. I guess the cops were after me for something that I said there. But yeah, Three Crows AI tournament is going to be pretty good, and the content, the tutorials, etc., will be much improved as a result of our AI work that is continuing to extend into the rest of this week. And then, yeah, that's essentially been the bounty stuff. So, pretty cool stuff. I have been thinking a little bit more about things to do during the tournament break, and obviously we're going to continue AI improvements, UI improvements, the BNet server investigation, and a bunch of other things. But as far as events go, I do think I want to do that like mid-table class 2 sort of tournament or like group stage only event. And maybe instead of like, maybe it's literally, it's actually like whoever wins the group is like they fight against each other or something. And so it's like group A and B face off in the semifinals. Group C and D, the winners there face off against the other semifinal. And then the winner of those semifinals faces off against the grand final. So we have like a very truncated tournament. But I think the group stage stuff could be really cool. I guess we'll see how many group stages how many groups rather we can make out of the existing roster of class 2s. I do think it would be really cool, just as like a one-off event. Like, can we do like a one-day event? Well, maybe if we can, it would have to be like, I don't know, it would have to be limited to 4 groups, right? So I'd have to see what the interest is. I don't know if we even have that many class 2s that would be interested in playing, but I want to see people like, you know, I want to see like Dead Infested again. I want to see obviously like 3 Crow and Biddy B again. I say shout out to my homie Moonhunter who narrowly avoided qualification versus Hupsea. And yeah, like all that stuff is really cool to me. So I do want to see what's going on with that and how like those players have shaped up. And that might even give us a good understanding or a good like little guesstimate of like who's going to win the whole deal. Who's going to qualify to the next tournament, or who might we favor. And so I think we'll do that. We'll do a tournament like that. I don't know if it'll be before or after Christmas or if it'll even be before the end of the year. But I would like to do that. I think that might be our first event, is just a class 2 tournament. And maybe we get like some of the class 1s like Nablime and Veek to do casts alongside myself and Mesk if they are available. Maybe Mesk signs up for that tournament, actually. Who knows? But that would be pretty cool to see. And I would love to get people's involvement in that. Dude, Hupsea could actually cast that. He could cast that and get angry at everybody being bad. He could cast that and say, what the fuck, the Zerg didn't go 6 pool? He's an idiot. That's just the cast. That's the whole commentary. Other than that, though, I think just having Pr0totypes return on a fairly regular basis will be good. We'll probably get some more information about desyncs, if I had to guess, that we can almost certainly act on. And then beyond that, we can also get some progress made on other such events. So I think as we continue on, as we arrive at a more complete game state and we add more game modes and we have more games played and, you know, sort of spread the word that way, I think this shit's going to continue taking off. And I think CMBW, it's just obviously here to stay. Like, this was the year that we got a lot of growth in. This was the year that we did all these tournaments and figured out how to, you know, sort of cast a wide net as far as competitive players go. And we're building up improved ways to install the game and improved ways to play the game as far as the UI is concerned, and fixing a bunch of stuff that probably should have been fixed a lot sooner, in all honesty, but, you know, it was not a focus at the time. this break is going to be really good for us, and I figure why not also run occasional like one-day events or whatever? Why not have these Pr0totypes kick off all the time and all this other stuff, right? So why not? Why not do that every now and then? I got to scratch the itch of seeing people play the game in a silly way, but also a serious way, in a weird roundabout kind of manner. The fact that it's for a tournament would also mean it's silly. So let's get Lucy in there. Let's get 3Crow in there. Let's get all these memers in there. I want a whole meme tournament. And I think this is the only way I can make it happen. So at least that's the only guaranteed way to make it happen. And hey, you know what? Alexhandr, he asks a question in this episode of Pr0totype for the coffee section. So yeah, I need to see him in there too. He's also got a meme on people. All right, before we get to the coffee questions of this episode, actually, I'll briefly touch on the Askosi progress and the development of content. So there's a little bit of a sort of progress update here. So the concepts for the Askosi have been receiving some attention. I'm actually going to be working on those later today alongside the AI work that I do today. So that will be something where by the time this video comes out, if you go back to the page, you'll probably see some more entries there, some more discussion, some more thoughts, but definitely something that, from my standpoint, is really exciting. I really want to see more Askosi work, and I really want to see, I'll probably start working on some basic graphics for them, or at least like source some placeholders somewhat soon, because I really would love to bang out a bunch of work on them and get them at least like a minimum viable product version of a lot of their assets and like get stuff that will work, right? We might be poring over the asset list, the like graphics that we've ripped from various sources, and we might be like grabbing the old blackjack sprite and all sorts of other really wacky things, just for the sake of saying, hey dude, we have something that we can put in here. And maybe some of the stuff that we took from Terran as well, as we replace things, like eventually the Ramses will be replaced. Well, maybe I can take that graphic and then like change the colors on it and it'll be ready to go, stuff like that, right? Or some of the other old graphics that we had, like for like 1 week, there was a really jank Durandal graphic that was basically just some dude that punches. It's kind of like the Golem, but a little bit more round and less jagged. That graphic might end up being a placeholder Askosi graphic, right? So like we can just grab a bunch of shit that we've seen processed and that we've done ourselves, and then we know, okay, this isn't great, but it's a thing, it's something. And so definitely more work that we need to do more work. We need to do to get a bunch of placeholder graphics in and then think about what we can do to like make our own versions of those graphics where we have like source access to the models and we can at least improve it over time. But that will be something, man. That will be something. So definitely keep your eye out on that, because eventually the concept progress will turn into modeling progress or asset implementation progress or whatever. And that will be a very interesting time. On the content side, we've been working on the tutorials for the Zerg tutorial in particular has been picking up some steam. I think it's in a pretty good space as far as the AI is concerned. I want to script out a couple of expansion options and stuff, and maybe have a couple of things here and there that like change over time. But I don't need it to be too high concept. I mostly just need to figure out how to write the script, how to do the voice acting, how I want to present that. And so, yeah, it's soon going to be in the same point that the Terran tutorial is in, where I have Mesk's voice acting, I've got my placeholder voice acting for 2 characters, and I think one of them is fine for me to be the character, and the other one is, well, we'll have to see. But maybe it'll end up lasting for a bit longer than I would expect. Or maybe we'll get somebody else with a good microphone and a reasonable range to step in, as Roller Skates is currently on holiday. So I hope he's enjoying himself. Beyond that, though, definitely, I guess it's obvious. We do need these tutorials out there. We need something that will encourage growth from new players who are looking for something kind of like CMBW, but they're intimidated about the girth of the project, how large and vast and just swollen the tech trees seem to be. So if we can demystify that, if we can make it appear smaller than it actually is, and allow them to sort of learn it bit by bit, then that will absolutely be a good thing, a win. And, you combine that with progress that we want to make on improving the installation process, I think it's obvious, right? So despite that, we have been seeing more and more people show up and add more, I guess you could say, I guess, I don't know, like more people are trying it, more people are getting into it. It's spreading by word of mouth. Like Hapsea went at some point from saying like, I'm not going to play this game after the tournament, dude. This is bullshit, to I need to add more people into the game. I need more people to play this so I can practice against them. Like, it was funny. So like you can see the range of reactions he has sometimes where he gets angry or whatever. And you know, he's a really cool guy as far as like spreading the word of the project goes. I really do appreciate that. Hopefully he can, you know, he's got his tilt under control now that he understands the project a bit more. I guess Shambler said something funny like, I am not going to tell you what the counter to my strategy is because I don't remember the context. He's like, I'm not going to give up a tournament win for it, which is a Shambler thing to say, to be honest. You know, I don't even think there's anything in particular wrong with that, but you know, it's funny. It's just funny is all. And yeah, I don't know. I look at all this and I think to myself, damn, like, where are we going to be at this time next year? Like, how many tournaments will we have run? How many amazing things will have happened? You know, like, I'm really fucking excited for the future of this project. If we end up shipping the Askosi even by like halfway through the year, I think that'll have been a success. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, again, a rough draft version of them was available sooner than that. And I'm really looking forward to banging out all the technical limitations and extending this engine even further than it was ever meant to go. Even further beyond, guys. Even further beyond. Speaking of even further beyond, if you want to send us threes so we can continue really stretching the limits of not just Brood War's engine, but also the RTS as a concept, well, you can send us money using the coffee link in the description below. Pr0totype on Week 7, the two of us, the dynamic duo, or Week 3, really, as Hapsea once said on his stream. Yes, you too can send us money. And these gentlemen that I'm about to answer questions for have already sent us money, and we appreciate that. You guessed correctly. It's time for coffee questions. The Shambler is the first up, and I actually have to reopen Discord so I can read the entire question here because it was a long one, and it also had some, I guess we could say it had some tongue-in-cheek aspects to it. So get ready. What kind of roles do the females in various regencies, in those regencies that can be said to have males and females, play in their societies? Are there equivalents to the feminist movement as obnoxious as ours? Think carefully, friend. Your ESG Gibbs are on the line. Yeah, well, Shambler, hope you're doing well, dude. I will say that as far as females are concerned, like, the main thing that you would point to is that sometimes they actually can be pretty useful for military operations. And when he says regencies, he's talking about xibalba, which is my original setting in the science fiction genre, specifically made to cater towards large-scale military operations, such that we can have really cool RTS engagements and similar things. Now, the civilizations, from a perspective, like, you will mostly be interacting with the military side. There's going to be some political stuff here and there, or like, I guess you could call it the red tape that you'll sometimes see from bureaucracy or whatever. But for the most part, you'll be interacting from a military standpoint, and you'll get bits and pieces about the civilization, I guess you could call it like the society, and so details of that will filter in, but they're not like paramount to whatever military conflicts may or may not be happening, right? Like, I guess there's certain cases where I share a lot of details actually about things like the Ansifi, the Dira Anoi Republic that we've got going on in the tutorial campaign, which is indeed an Ansifi project. That is a case where they have... Yeah, they definitely have, like, okay, there's like this pirate group, and the pirate group is like ostracized from society for whatever reason, and then there's like this whole thing about like, okay, what are they up to, and how do they operate, and in what ways are they different than humans, and like what's peculiar about them or whatever. So there's definitely some details that you can garner from that, right? But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm answering this question for the most part in the context of the military standpoint, because that is what's relevant to what the player will be experiencing first and foremost. But the question is obviously, what roles do the females play in their societies? And I mean, obviously, like, if they have male and females in the first place, then they are going to have like live births probably, right? And then if those births are going to be I mean, like that, the females are the ones that the birth, right? That's sort of like how it works when you have I forget what the term is when you have like a sexually dimorphic species is what I was thinking of there. I'm pretty sure that's the term for it. And so when you have that kind of thing, like one of them is going to be the sort of fertilizer and the other one is going to be the child bearer. And that's essentially how it works. Now, not all of them are going to have births exactly like that. Like the rune don't have, right now I'm not sure if I'm going to have like male and female for the rune. They might actually be a situation where they have like, they kind of have like so many different genders that they might as well have no gender, by which I mean, they're not required for this. I mean, I don't think you would call it gender exactly, or like biological sex. They don't have the same level of copulation. Like the way that they reproduce is sort of like similar to mitosis. So it almost doesn't matter. So instead it's more like they have different personalities and personas and stuff that it's going to be, like you might be able to map the human condition onto that being, oh, that's kind of like what a human female might be like if they were in that physical form, versus, you know, here's a human male personality or like a more masculine personality or something. So maybe you can think about it from those perspectives, but you're not going to be able to see like, obviously not every regency is going to basically be sexually dimorphic is what I'm getting at, right? So in terms of reproduction, yeah, I don't think it's going to surprise too many people. I don't really care about the whole ESG stuff. I don't really care about, you know, representing some weird niche political offshoot or philosophical offshoot of like modern day human philosophy and political study. I don't care about representing that in a sci-fi game that has no humans in it. And so I think any comparison to feminist movements and stuff is unlikely to be relevant. I mean, I'm going to operate on the assumption. This is actually relevant for Myrian's question as well afterwards, which I, of course, will get to after this. But I am operating under the assumption that by the time you're playing an RTS game, by the time the events of an RTS game set in xibalba are taking place, the species that are active powers that you can call regencies will have moved past any weird shit like that. They'll have survived that. If that's one of the layers of the Great Filter where you explode your whole society and civilization due to fucking feminism or whatever, like radical feminism or Marxism or whatever you want to call it, you know, you can just sort of like look up Jordan B. Peterson and listen to his videos that have been memed to existence and to hell and back, but have some kernel of truth in them, I think is an uncontroversial statement. Yeah, you can look at those and you can imagine what I'm talking about here. I don't think that stuff is gonna be still in the mix. I think they've been moved past all of that. So you won't see anything other than the sort of default. Like there's going to be some females who are generally geared towards caretaking and familial stuff, just like they're going to be males who are geared towards that. And Sifi are generally a lot more like, it's already described them as, you know, they are very much exploratory. They want to see the world, see the universe, right? They want to go places where there are no Ansifi yet necessarily, like they're a settler species in some ways, where they want to go out and cultivate a new life in many respects. And, you know, some of them choose to stay where they are at. Some of them choose to emigrate, right? And some of them choose to go off in some location where there are no other people there. So they're like not exactly nomadic, but like a lot of them do have this call to travel the stars. And maybe they'll return back to their home republic or wherever they came from, their home nation, when they're done, should they survive, of course. And maybe they won't. Maybe they'll stick around and sort of fuck around and find out. And maybe they'll see what exactly is awaiting them on the other side, in the other area. So yeah, I guess just judging at it from that perspective, right? Like using the Ansifi as a test case, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that when we're dealing with the sort of like idea of what the females do, they're kind of in the same boat, right? Like there might accompany this sort of flotilla of people who are trying to leave and go on, I guess, like, you wouldn't call it a pilgrimage because it's not like religious in nature or anything, but okay, they're going to go somewhere and they're going to travel and they're going to sightsee and they're going to sort of backpack across Europe, but the galactic equivalent of that. Like, okay, if there's going to be women in this party, then maybe they're going to be more on the caretaking side. Maybe they're going to know thing or two about first aid. There might be nurses or doctors. They're going to know how to handle themselves with a weapon because every Ancifi basically has to learn that, especially if they're on a fringe world. Like, it's a very rare, cushy position to be in, male or female, if you don't know how to use a weapon. Like, that's a sign of extreme societal privilege, you could call it, if you don't know how to use a weapon. So, and it's also kind of frowned upon anyway. Even if you have that privilege, you probably don't want to be thinking about that, and you probably want to learn how to do it anyway, just in case, right? Because again, you're unlikely to put down roots super fast and like stay where you were born, especially. Very, very unlikely, very rare that happens. So yeah, this is assuming, I think you can roughly map that onto a bunch of other things. This question could be enormous if I had to go through every single regency that was sexually dimorphic, but yeah, I mean, I guess you would say, I guess like one interesting answer to this that's non-standard, that doesn't fit that bill, because I think most of them are going to be roughly like that for the Ancifi side, is I do think, and I haven't decided on this exactly, right? But I do think that the Macrolon are going to have very obvious, almost like a caste system in place for the males and the females of their society, where the males get the shit done and they run the empires and they run the militaries and all this other stuff. And the females are the ones who are there. It's not that their job is looked down upon or not as important, but they are very obviously not positioned in roles of similar leadership. Their leadership is over other females often. It is as a sort of, I guess you could think of them as like, again, caregivers in some ways, but like they're going to teach the men. They're sort of like child rearing, but like on a societal level, where it's like they teach the male Macrolon details about how they are going to use their natural gifts. They're going to teach them how to, they help them refine their like sort of, what is it? The mind control by genetics, right? And their telekinetic powers and stuff. And they sort of help refine them. They're the teachers, right? They're the educators of the society. And so that's like more, I guess, disparate than you might expect. Whereas like the Ancifi have military, like women in the military, and some of their units are actually female, right? And so like there's that. But then when you think about it from the perspective of the Macrolon, it's going to be a little bit different. The Macrolon are a little bit more like, no, you stay in your lane, you do your thing. And that's not to say that there's never going to be a case where there's like an empress or whatever, but it would be comparatively very rare. There would have to be some very weird chain of accession, I guess, where you have like, here's the six, like, in the same way that like, I guess that would be the equivalent of like in the United States, if like the secretary of the state or like the House secretary is sworn in as president because everybody else has been, incapacitated or killed. Like there was some movie like that where that happened. I can't remember. It might have been White House Down or something, but it was some funny movie that was very much like modern fantasy, basically, in terms of what it was actually doing. But okay, that's a movie. That's a thing that's happening in that movie. That's kind of like what would happen if a woman was empress, like acting emperor. Because like they just need like a commander in crisis, basically, a head of state, because the other heads have already rolled in some capacity or they've been incapacitated, right? And so that's the kind of thing that would happen there. So there's an interesting, like, I guess, aberration compared to the other societies and how they have a little bit more of an equal sort of parity between like the roles of males and females in the society, because for the most part they're not like the Macrolon again are like a society of psychopaths. So you wouldn't necessarily like they're very kind of like sort of obvious about it. Like they just know what is the most likely path to victory. And like, again, they don't get emotional about people betraying them either. Like they just know that like at some point I will probably be betrayed. So I will have to make sure that I am on top of things. And as long as I am successful, which of course I will be, then I'll just kill the people or incapacitate the people who would otherwise betray me. I'll betray them first, kind of thing. Like that's their whole society. So they're very strange. But everybody else is like, for the most part, all the other sexually dimorphic regencies are There's a term for it being equal between the sexes, but I can't remember what it is. Egalitarian, I think, is the term I'm thinking of. They're a little bit more egalitarian. Obviously, they still have their own tendencies. Like the women are going to tend towards different careers than the men are in the military and otherwise. So there you go. Hopefully you got your answer you were looking for there, Shambler. And I did say that Myrian's question was up next. He asks, what foods do the various regencies in Xibalba consume? What sorts are oft utilized and consumed by their militaries? Well, when I was mentioning earlier that I think that I'm assuming that all of the regencies are past a certain point of social evolution, I would say the same thing is there's an assumption that they're all past a certain point of technological evolution, which is not to say that they have like, I'm not super familiar with Star Trek, and I've said this numerous times during these question sections where somebody might ask me about details about like a sci-fi setting or something. But I know that they have these fabricators, right? And I don't even know if fabricator is the right word for it, but basically they can materialize like food and other such things. And I feel like that actually makes a huge difference. Like I feel like the show might not think through how significant of a change that would be. I know there's at least some lip service, if not more world building elsewhere. And somebody in the comments can sort of explain this a little bit better, because I know we have some people like Helltrix and Shambler and stuff who have watched more Star Trek. I think maybe even Myrian. But the fabricators feel like they would do more than just eliminate poverty and stuff. I feel like with the ability to basically materialize food, for example, and starvation without having any resources, then that really does change a lot, right? So I think, though, that you're going to have something where it's not necessarily with no resource input required, but you'll be able to turn pretty much any organic matter, rearrange it into something edible that will sustain you nutritionally. There's obviously like the idea of the nutrient paste. I think some regencies will indeed have that, where they must be utilitarian in that sense. The Githrovan are essentially, they have the whole like sun spawn thing going for them, where they essentially photosynthesize. At least that's the current plan. I might deviate away from that later. But by the way, they aren't the only ones. The Rhazellium also do, but more about that in the Three Crows question, which is up next as well. See, I'm so good about these little stingers there that tell you all the details about what you might expect in the future. No, the next thing is just that there's definitely going to be people who go for the more like, here's the functional utilitarian aspect. Here's like nutrient paste. It doesn't taste very good, but it'll get you through the day. And it's like, yeah, okay, we're definitely going to have that. Like, I think back to some of the Dune books where they discuss certain like teas and other elixirs that have spice melange in them, that also have like some kind of stim. I forget what it's called, but it was like, I think they literally called them like stim teas, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's like, okay, they have like stimulants, and that'll keep them awake, or that'll help them remain alert during certain important situations. Like there's a couple of times where like the head of state for the Bene Gesserit, the Mother Superior, I was trying to think about that. The Mother Superior is basically like, yeah, I'm just having the stim tea now because I'm about to fall asleep otherwise, and I really need to remain conscious. And so like stuff like that, right? You're definitely going to have all manners of essentially performance enhancing drugs for the militaries. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was going to be something kind of similar to that, where they have stimulants and they have like things that are maybe appetite suppressants, or maybe there actually are just like nutrition delivery vehicles that, might be injections within their suit or something. And so when it comes to the home time, when they're away from the war and away from the front line, don't be surprised if they're a lot more rich in terms of what kinds of food they like. The palates of the different species are very distinct, and obviously some of the food can't be eaten by other, like the way that it's prepped or whatever makes it like toxic or not nutritious or what have you, depending on what species you're talking about. The Rune like to just consume whatever the fuck. They're almost like goats in a way that, like, you can like feed a goat like a tin can. I mean, I don't think it's nutritious for them, but they still eat it anyway because they're goats. And the Rune are kind of like that, where if they don't think that it's worth anything to them, they might try eating it at the very least just to see if it's nutritious. And so like they actually burn a hell of a lot of calories doing what they do on the battlefield. So you'd be surprised. Like the feasts are usually just whatever corpses, whatever raw materials that happen to be around. And that's like between battles and stuff, right? So Yeah, a little unsettling because they essentially, I mean, they'll do cannibalism too and stuff. They don't really care too much, but they're definitely like weird creatures. Anyway, it's funny that they came up twice so far in these questions because they're not the most commonly discussed faction within or regency within xibalba, but they're pretty interesting anyway. And as far as like Ansifi are concerned, generally the Ansifi are appreciative of like, I would say very like, you know how like we'll eat steak and the steak can sometimes be tough and it takes a while to chew. They love chewy food because they have these big ass, you know, like not really super big teeth per se, but it's like their jaw strength is on average much higher than a human's. So they can do a lot more in that respect where they'll love like tough meat and stuff. So that's probably, I would say that's like an obvious one where they might really quite like that. So, you know, there's like different answers that I would have depending on the different regencies, but hopefully that was enough information to at least tell you what's up with the militaries. Because again, that's like I said in Shambler's answer, most of the time you're encountering the species, you're interacting with them on a military level. These are the kinds of things that might be discussed or referenced offhandedly by some of the people. Like, you know, you might make contact with a fellow Ansifi military leader and he'll say, well, my troops are on their second daily dose of stims, but they're ready to go, you know, stuff like that, right? So that to make it clear that they've been run ragged a little bit, and they're holding it together, but maybe only barely. Stuff like that might be referenced, but that might be the extent of it because it's not super relevant and pertinent to the military operations. But, you know, maybe we'll have reference to some of the more high class meals if you're talking to like a political leader for the Ansifi or something like that. 3Crow asks, everything about Rhazellium, how they are powered, the types of resources they collect, any special interests, and what each tier of Rhazellium tech might look like. Well, homie 3Crow, I will open up the tech map for them. Well, that ended up being a bit of a fraud because at some point the website was changed so that if you had no unit entries, you would no longer see the race table at all, which is where you get details on the branch names. So I wound up opening up the PHP file instead. And the Rhazellium PHP file does say that there is the perpetual branch, the reassembling branch, and the designed branch. And so this is useful for jogging my memory about the answer to the like tier of tech question. By the way, there's supposedly 10 tiers of tech planned for xibalba. I don't know if that's going to be true going forward, but that was sort of where we left off last. I obviously can't answer. Like that would be a question unto itself. That would be pretty long. So I'm not going to answer every single one, but I'll pick up some, you know, special ones that I think are noteworthy and memorable. But they're powered by the sun, which is probably not that surprising when you consider the technology that they have and the fact that they spend most of their lifespan on an individual drone basis in orbit or in space, right, as opposed to on the battlefield. The types of resources they collect, they pretty much just reduce everything down to raw materials such that they can construct additional of themselves. So it's like, you know, the essentially the magmite, right, and the hyperfiles and stuff. They essentially lust after those materials. And the reason for it is, again, they have that runaway task, right? They're self-replicating, and their goal is to make more of themselves so that they can make more of themselves. And, you know, it's kind of like a closed-loop system where they just keep going. And they don't really have a higher goal per se, at least none that is revealed to the player initially. Which is my cheat way of saying I haven't decided if they're going to be more interesting or nuanced than that, because sometimes you just have that as your bog standard one. But special interests would definitely include anytime Thruk are involved. The Rhazellium really think that like they've detected that they are high priority targets to melt down. They definitely go after large scale space installations and other like essentially like really heavy what would you call it? Like Well, anything. It doesn't have to be an artificial installation. Come to think of it, because they can obviously take the organic material and turn that into something useful as well. So they do tend to seek out like enormous fleets, giant concentrations of material. Obviously, planets would constitute that as well, since they'll just disassemble entire planets and stuff. They will sometimes try to disassemble stars. But I think at this point in the setting, they've realized that stars are beacons for other material. And so sometimes they'll keep them up for the purposes of signaling, using like Dyson spheres or whatever to benefit from the sort of like power. Like obviously they power themselves off of that. But sometimes they'll still disassemble them for one reason or another. Like if there's a binary star system, they might go after one of them for that purpose. And so, like, these are some of the things that they tend to do if left to their own devices for a very long amount of time. Obviously, it does take some pretty significant time to do this sort of thing. But they leave like super voids in their wake. If you guys are familiar with that term from the cosmos, it's like, why are all of these random areas of the universe like missing in, like there's no stars there for some reason? Well, it might just be because of the Rhazellium. And that's another reason why, like, obviously, if there's no stars there, you're probably not going to go there to investigate it, because it's not as valuable as if there are stars there, because then you'd actually be able to say, oh, well, based on, like, observations, the stars have some planets near them, and maybe those planets have resources. You're not going to do that in the middle of nowhere, right? So, I mean, funny I say that, because obviously darkness is a resource unto itself for the Nadarasatha, but for the most part, most regencies are not going to bother going there. And so that's why they keep the suns around. In addition to the fact that that's what powers them. But yeah, they will love to go after things like the Orlotosgoths for the Orlothrae. They love to go after giant collections of ships and other such things. Like there's a memorial fleet that the Ansifi left after a battle with the Keltar. That is going to be a mission that you play as the Ansifi against both the Triskipians, which are other Ansifi, and the Keltar, Ken Garaton. Those are in the tutorial campaign planned. And that's cool because it gets to show you, like, here's what the Ansifi do after a battle. Sometimes they'll commemorate, like, a fallen general or whatever, and they'll do so by saying, hey, here's this memorial fleet. We'll leave it untouched, or we'll move it intact to some other place where it's less, inconvenient. And the reason why they'll do that is their own, like, ceremony, right? That's essentially their funeral. But when they come into, like, if the Rhazellium see that, they just look, more scrap. That's what they're like. So they love to see that, and they'll definitely jump at it, go after the opportunity to do that. So that's another special interest that they might have. But yeah, they definitely like the Thruk. They definitely like the Orlotosgoths, so they like the Orlothrae as a result. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now that I have to answer that question. As far as the tier of Rhazellium tech, I want something that can obviously, like, just straight up stun and disassemble units. Sort of like the Talos Salvage, but in a more interactive way, ideally. Maybe it wouldn't stun as a result. Maybe they would just attach. I do want, like, going back to the branch ideas, the Perpetual would have some way to sustain themselves. Reassembling would be more corpse-driven. Or like the Simulacra for the Protoss. And then Designed are a little bit more like powerful individual forms that have their own niche uses or specialized uses at the very least. And so that might give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I do think that their way of interacting with the terrain in a destructible sense, where they like cave in cliffs and stuff, is actually going to give them more money, which is going to be kind of interesting, because you can imagine like a mid-table unit, like mid-tier unit, like say tier 5 if it's going to be 10 tiers, or tier 2 if it's going to be 3 tiers or whatever, might be able to convert cliffs into resources, which is essentially finding another way to mine and giving them access to more resources. And that's sort of like how we're going to justify them having, say, higher resource costs on some units that might not be worth the money in aggregate. And the reason being is, like, just sort of like how Zerg can make more of them, and that's what justifies it. The Rhazellium are going to be able to get more money instead. They're going to be able to find other ways to make money. And that is, I think, an interesting sort of novelty that you don't normally see within RTS design. So, and for obvious reasons, it's actually quite hard to balance. Or at least that's what I feel like on its face. But that's still something I want to experiment with. yeah, like melting down enemy units, turning them into scrap, which is either going to be money or it's going to be like health. Like the perpetual units are going to convert it into health and stuff. The reassembling units will convert it into new units. And the designed units probably won't convert it into anything, but maybe they would convert it into money, actually. They might be the units that you go for that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else that immediately jumps out at me as far as like a unit concept that I want to share or, you know, something that is more specialized than that. But definitely a lot of like taking the battlefield by storm, swarming onto the field, and building a large number of units that can somehow interact with corpses in a way to either heal, frontline reinforce, or turn into more money that they can then use to make more things. That is the current set of plans anyway. So hopefully that was illustrative enough of the kinds of things that you can expect out of the Rhazellium and GG's 3Crow. We got 2 more questions to answer, starting with the Beaver99. Have you thought about exploring more than 2 resource types in your later projects? Well, sir, I will say, if I was going to incorporate 3 or more resource types, then to do so, I would definitely need to think about what the other resource types are going to be. I think we have a really nice sort of balance when it comes to, you know, minerals and gas. What I really like about minerals and gas is that they are used for most things, if not all things. Like there were some things in the old versions of this project that were gas only, and obviously there's a decent number of things that are mineral only. But, you know, like Veek once put it that the minerals are your scaling factor and the gas is your power factor or tech factor. I think I might have said tech factor as like an alternative to power factor. But, you know, that's kind of like a good way to put it. And I've used that characterization to good effect as far as like making decisions about balance and resource costs and stuff like that. And when you're going through all of that, the main thing that I have to say is that if I added a 3rd resource into the mix, what would it be used for? When would you make it? Would it be this like niche resource that you would only use for a few things? Like if we added aquatic units to the game, naval combat or whatever, would you add oil or something, like some resource that's specific for and I'm not actually saying oil in StarCraft, but like, you know, something like oil, where it's in Warcraft 2, it's like specifically used for the resources for boats and stuff. And, you know, Dynamo and I both came to the conclusion back when I played that game for Warcraft 2 that if it was just gold instead, then it would be a lot more reasonable because you wouldn't have to need a navy to make a navy, which is obviously a catch-22. So from a design perspective, it just doesn't really make that much sense. And I don't think any of the competitive Warcraft 2 stuff that goes around right now actually uses oil, like any naval maps at all. I could be wrong about that, but that's what it seemed like to me. However, I think I'm not going to say that it's impossible, that it's good or useful in some way to add additional resources, because I don't know if it's impossible. But I do think that it is quite probable that the general push of having a 3rd resource, that the knock-on effects would basically be to like complicate things further without having too much gain. So I have to think about that a little bit more, and it's probably going to be something that I do try to experiment with, at least conceptually at some point, because I want to make a lot of different RTS games, obviously, and so it would make sense to maybe add a couple more or whatever. But I never liked how Age of Empires did it, because it always felt like it was too gimmicky. And then in Warlords Battlecry, it was kind of like all of your units, like it was a little arbitrary which units costed what and which upgrades costed what and which buildings costed what. But generally you wanted to get as maximum number of all of them, so you could make things like higher tier keeps and the Titans, which are like giga units that you can only make one of, and dragons and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, all your powerful units are going to be gated behind all of them anyway, so you might as well make all of them anyway. So I don't know. It just ended up feeling not very impactful, or so impactful that it was really distracting and annoying. So it's like one or the other, right? So finding a middle ground between that where it feels elegantly implemented, I think would be the challenge. It's not something that I'm going to say I'm never going to attempt, because I think I probably will at least think about it from a conceptual standpoint. But I almost don't necessarily see I don't think it's a necessary thing that we would have to change going into our other games. I think you can have just 2 resources. I don't think you should have only 1 resource. I think it should be 2 minimum. And I'm not sure if it should be 2 maximum, but I'm leaning towards that right now. So hopefully that was explicative enough and that you got your answer. Thank you for posing the question. Alexhandr asks, what were your inspirations for the Askosi? What books or movies or novels, if any? Why cyborg lizards? And if possible, give some details about their society and how it functions. Well, I did answer the last portion of that question when, I want to say it was like 2 episodes ago, when I talked about the nature of the Askosi, like how they came to be in like Chrysiliant and just in general, like what my reason for them being added to CMBW was, like how I justified it in lore or whatever. How they had this big civil conflict and they had a Dune-esque scattering event after that. And this is the force that you play as and face in CMBW, or that you will play as and you will face in CMBW, in the lore is like a tiny fraction of the Askosi after their home sector was essentially wiped out or sacrificed in order to win a civil conflict in that area. And there's definitely, like, I think it's really interesting to think about what the result of that actually is, and what the Askosi in this local area would actually do. But they are, I guess, like, why cyborg lizards? Well, I didn't want another hominid race. So, like, I have to kind of back up a little bit, because the Askosi, they're not one of the older concepts that I've had. Like, they're not like the Keltar or the Makral Das, where I've had these concepts for like 10 years. The Askosi are a little bit more new than that. And I always knew that I wanted some kind of experimentation around the idea of direct democracy. And the way that I thought about that was like, okay, if we're going to have direct democracy, then we have to explain why we would do that and how we would avoid, like, corruption and all this other stuff. So what if we had something kind of like the Protoss Kala, where they have the mind melding thing and they can read each other's thoughts? And then I was like, well, obviously I don't want to overlap with Protoss if I'm going to add them to CMBW. But just in general, I thought, like, well, okay, that's an option, but what else might we do? Well, if that is, instead of it being like a built-in intrinsic trait or whatever from genetic manipulation by the Xel'Naga, if the Askosi have it because of technology, then what would that say about the rest of their society? What would that mean for their society? Well, it would mean that they have to all basically be, in some capacity, cyborgs or cybernetically enhanced. And that's where the cyborg part of the cyborg lizard came from. As for why lizards, I knew I just didn't want another hominid species, and they were supposed to be part of the Embraceat, and the Embraceat already have a hominid species, so I wasn't going to double dip on that, right? So the Retons are already sort of like the hominids of the Embraceat, and I wasn't going to be like, well, here's another hominid. Instead, I decided to go with lizard. I admit that was a little bit more of an arbitrary decision, but the cyborg part was like, okay, I want direct democracy though, and like, what can we do with that? And like, how can I like play around with that concept? Well, if they are cyborg in nature, then they have this technological interface that will allow them to instantaneously consume any information that is distributed and be on the same page, and then they can send their own thoughts on the matter and that sort of thing, right? And so they can communicate that way. And I still have to speak and do other things in the context of communicating over, say, like I guess a data net or something. Like if they're not nearby and they don't have like a local link with each other, then they will need to communicate verbally. But if they're closer to each other, then they can do so without opening their mouths, just through their cybernetic enhancements. They can do the communications. And that's things like open up video feeds so that you can see through their eyes or whatever, and other really important details. And that's sort of going back into the idea of like them collaborating with each other and being able to switch places with each other or jump to each other or whatever. That sort of collaboration thing is really interesting to me from a gameplay standpoint. And it's a clear sort of extension of their lore in that respect. But I can't really point to books, movies, or novels as far as something that inspired me to make the Askosi the way that they are, at least not consciously. Like, I'm sure reading Dune gave me a lot of inspiration in a couple of different ways. There are a lot of ideas to mull over about, like, world building in a sci-fi novel, because the way that Frank Herbert writes is he leaves a lot to the imagination. He has you fill in the gaps about a lot of details regarding the world building, and I find that to generally be more interesting than the writer. Like, I don't know, like Tolkien says that he doesn't like, or he said in the past that he was not a man who appreciated allegory, because he wanted you to basically come up with your own conclusion. But then a lot of his writing, in stark contrast to that, a lot of his writing was like, hey, dude, I'm going to leave nothing to the imagination and tell you every detail about this one thing or whatever, and I'm going to spend a really long time doing it. It was kind of funny that it was like two sides of the coin, because at the very least, he wasn't beating you over the head with like a social message, but he was telling you exactly what something was. And that's well and good. I mean, he has his own vision, but I feel like the Dune style of writing, or the style of writing within Dune, it was at least more interesting to me in that respect. But I can't point to like an exact thing that made me think of that. It's just the most recent sci-fi series that I've read. So it's like, yeah, of course that probably had some contribution. But the Askosi were obviously conceived way earlier than I read the Dune books. So I can't really say that it was a direct inspiration, even if I knew some specific thing that I took from there. So, I mean, like the scattering thing is kind of like, that's just an easy way for me to explain it. But that was always their plan, right? So at least as far as like how they got flung into the CMBW verse. But yeah, their society and how it functions. Hopefully the direct democracy quote kind of helps you out with that, as well as understanding their history. I'm not going to retread all of what I discussed in the last couple of podcasts before you came back into activity. But definitely go check out, like, maybe it's like 31 or 32 or something. You can check out those episodes, see if the Askosi make it in the coffee questions and the timestamps, and listen on to your heart's content. Thanks for your question, homie. That's going to close out the show. My voice is already starting to go because I casted earlier. So today's Smash stream will definitely be a bit of a tall order. But I'll take a walk and have some food and enjoy myself when I work on the Askosi concepts some more. So it's cool that we ended today's podcast episode with the Askosi, because I'm going to begin today's stream with the Askosi. So hope you guys are going to join me for that and enjoy the progress we make on these pods and on these on this project and on the Askosi planning and all this other stuff. And yeah, sit tight, and pretty soon we will have some pretty epic stuff underway. Looking forward to the next round of the Ascension number 7 playoffs. Looking forward to closing that tournament out and crowning a champion that is not Mystery Meat this time around. Will Shambler be able to claim a trophy? Will it be Nablime to make our total number of trophy winners 3? Will it be somebody else to also do that? Well, you're just going to have to find out. GG's.